Eliot explains that to write with tradition in mind does not mean imitating, as this would lead to repetition, and novelty is definitely better than repetition. And by tradition, Eliot here means the literary trends and the techniques that were used by the poets in the past. He defines tradition as something which is gained by the labor of knowing the literature of the past and by being critically aware of the techniques and content which is of value. In other words, a poet has to be selective and he should be aware of the order of literary trends, traditions dating back to the classics. Tradition, therefore, is the accumulated wisdom and experience of literature through the ages and is, according to Eliot, essential for great achievements within poetry. Eliot argues that no writer or piece of literature has value or significance when it is isolated from the literary canon. In other words, he means that by itself it has no value or worth. Therefore, in order to judge a work of art or literature, it must be compared to the works of the past. He believes that tradition is constantly changing due to the addition of new work to the literary canon. So, Eliot suggests that the author should conform to literary tradition and should be informed by the past. And when he does that, the work of the author modifies the work they have been informed by. This makes the poet aware of his own position within the present, but also his relevance in relation to the literature of the past. The modern author, by his accumulated knowledge and wisdom, adds meaning to the traditional text by incorporating its influence into his work. Eliot acknowledges that the new work of art, when it is original, modifies the literary tradition also, but in a small way. The relationship between past and present is not a one way street. The present can alter the past just as the past can inform the present. Eliot also acknowledges that knowledge of the past as a whole would be impossible to acquire, and therefore, in order to gain a good sense of tradition, one must critically examine the past, focusing on works of art that are considered to be of high value. He explains that the definition of a sense of tradition is to be critically aware of trends and techniques which were typical of a particular age, movement, or even author, and to have that ability to recognize if there is any deviation from this. An author with a good sense of tradition should also be aware that the main literary trends do not come from the recognized poets only, but that they must also be aware of trends that have been set by poets of lesser recognition also. What he is trying to say here is that a poet should not focus only on the very famous, popular, or recognized authors. There may be poets of lesser recognition who may have set new literary trends and techniques. So, a new poet must have that sense of discernment and knowledge. Although the work of the present poet is compared and contrasted to poets of the past, but this does not determine whether the work of the present is better than the work of the past. The comparison is made in order to analyze the new work to create a deeper understanding of the text. And it is only through this comparison that the traditional and the individual elements can be determined. Eliot recognizes that artists work with different materials and their art is a product of different eras. Therefore, it would be impossible to measure a qualitative improvement in any school of art. Eliot knew the essay would be criticized on the basis that there were great poets who did not have the level of education that Eliot claimed was required. But Eliot goes on to argue that it should be the duty of every poet to build their knowledge of the past for the duration of their whole career. Why? Because he believes that it is knowledge of tradition that encourages and strengthens the poet's ability to write great work.